We are usually taught from a very young age that humans are basically puzzle pieces.
Right. Like you're incomplete on your own.
Exactly. The whole reigning narrative is that to be truly whole, you have to find your missing half.
Find the right partner, fit into the exact right societal box.
Yeah, you just snap into this pre-existing structure. But what if you aren't a puzzle piece at all?
What if you're the entire puzzle?
Right. And that is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's be a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. Today, we are unpacking a single, really foundational document. It's
Well,
this deeply intricate philosophical text titled The Inner Architecture of Wholeness.
and it is a dense read, but so worth it.
Oh, absolutely. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore a radical framework for understanding human biology, gender, and just, identity as a whole.
Because this text completely bypasses the standard arguments you see on the news every day.
Yeah, we are moving entirely past the simple binary of like male versus female or dominant versus submissive.
We're looking at what the text calls embodied polarity and inner architecture.
Okay, let's unpack this because the paradigm-shifting claim of this text hits you literally right in the introduction.
It doesn't hold back.
It really doesn't. The philosophy argues that wholeness is not achieved by merging with someone else. Wholeness is revealed by integrating your own internal polarities.
Right, meaning you have everything you need inside the system already.
Which is such a massive shift from how we usually think about relationships.
It is, and to understand how the text arrives at that conclusion, we really have to look at how it redefines duality itself.
Because we live in a world heavily shaped by binary thinking.
Exactly.
Ah.
Duality is almost always treated as a strict opposition.
Yeah.
Light versus dark, inside versus outside.
Genitive versus receptive.
Yes. But this philosophy reframes duality. It insists that duality is actually a spectrum happening within a single field.
Not two warring sides.
Right. And this brings us to a crucial and, frankly, pretty provocative reclamation the text makes regarding the Japanese word futanari.
Yeah, and we need to pause and be incredibly clear here.
Definitely.
Because for a lot of people, that word is heavily associated with very specific, often fetishized pornographic context. It carries a lot of baggage.
A ton of baggage. But this text yanks that word completely out of that environment.
It deliberately divorces the word from fantasy or fetish, right?
Exactly. It elevates it into a rigorous metaphysical concept.
Mm.
Philosophically, the text defines it as a being who embodies both generative and receptive polarities simultaneously.
And the key phrase the author uses is not as a contradiction, but as integration.
Which is beautiful, honestly.
It is. But let's ground those terms before we go further. When the text says generative and receptive polarities, what are the actual mechanics of that?
So generative energy is the drive to create, initiate, penetrate, or project outward into the world.
Okay.
And receptive energy is the capacity to draw in, hold, cultivate, and respond.
And traditionally, society assigns generative entirely to male and receptive entirely to female.
Right. But the integrated being in this philosophical framework is a single, unified entity that operates both poles simultaneously.
It makes me think of like an electrical circuit.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, because in the binary way of thinking, society tells you that you are either the battery, like the power source pushing the energy out, or you are the light bulb.
The receptacle taking the energy in to produce light.
Right, and you're supposed to find the other component to make the system work. But what this text is describing, this integrated being,
They contain the entire circuit.
yes, within themselves. They are both the battery and the light bulb. They're generating the current and receiving it within their own closed, complete loop.
Functioning perfectly without short-circuiting.
Exactly.
And if you are the entire circuit, you aren't waiting for an external power source to turn you on, so to speak. You're entirely whole.
You generate your own light. But I mean, if we accept this integrated circuit idea, what happens to people who do feel entirely aligned with just one side of the spectrum?
The text addresses that head-on.
Because, like, who exactly does this concept map onto in the real world? Abstract metaphysics are great, but the text is adamant that this applies to lived physical realities.
It maps onto a surprisingly wide array of lived experiences.
Like who, specifically?
Well, the text explicitly applies this to transgender women
Oh.
who retain or consciously choose to retain the biological architecture they were born with.
While entirely inhabiting the identity, presence, and energetic field of the feminine.
Exactly. They
Right.
are physically embodying both the generative capacity and the receptive field.
So the retained anatomy isn't framed as like a male organ on a female body, which is how the traditional medical establishment often awkwardly categorizes it.
Right, the text completely reframes it as a female body's specific form of generative capacity.
Wow.
Yeah, it takes something that is often a source of deep societal friction and reframes it as a site of philosophical completion.
That's a huge paradigm shift.
It is, but the application doesn't stop there at all. It also maps onto cisgender women whose psychological or energetic makeup carries a massive amount of assertive, penetrative, or generative force alongside their female embodiment.
Okay, I have to challenge this point, though.
Good, sure.
If you are listening to this and you are a highly assertive cisgender woman, does calling your energy generative or penetrative just enforce the old patriarchal idea that power is inherently masculine?
That is a crucial pushback.
Right, because why does a woman exhibiting strong leadership have to be described using terminology that sounds so male-coded?
And the text anticipates that exact question. The philosophy argues that the patriarchy's greatest trick was falsely gendering energy itself.
Meaning assertiveness isn't biologically male.
Exactly. Assertiveness, outward projection, and dominant force are not biologically male traits. They are just the generative pole of human energy.
Oh, I see.
By claiming that a cisgender woman can fully operate from a generative pole without compromising her womanhood, the text is actually dismantling the monopoly men have historically claimed over power.
Because it proposes that womanhood is not a single, narrow, receptive path.
Right. Womanhood is a vast field.
A vast field. I like that. So what does this all mean?
Well, within that field, the text identifies two primary forms of embodiment. The first is what it calls concentrated polarity.
Concentrated polarity.
Okay, this is when a person's power, identity, and beauty flow from a singular, focused channel.
So if we go back to the circuit analogy, this is someone who operates purely and brilliantly as a laser beam.
Yes, and the text is very careful to state that concentrated polarity is not incomplete. It is precise.
Precise. Got it. And the second form?
The second form is integrated polarity. This is the person carrying that full electrical circuit, the assertive and receptive happening all at once.
What's fascinating here is that there is absolutely zero hierarchy between these forms.
Yes. None at all. A trans woman who pursues full surgical alignment is expressing concentrated polarity focused and precise.
And a trans woman who retains dual architecture is expressing integrated polarity, complete and complex.
Exactly. Or the assertive, deeply grounded cisgender woman leading a boardroom, she is expressing her integrated female polarity.
Neither is more evolved. They're just two valid expressions of the same fundamental nature.
You nailed it.
But if this inner architecture, the specific wiring of your internal circuit, is already deeply ingrained within you, how do you actually bring it to the surface?
That's where it introduces a pretty intense concept.
Yeah, it uses the phrase self-domination, which immediately made me pause.
That's a heavy phrase.
Very heavy. When most of us hear the word domination, we think of aggression. We think of restriction or forcing something down or just right-knuckling your way through life.
Right.
How does the author flip a harsh word like that into a mechanism of liberation?
It is a deliberate provocation, honestly. The text redefines self-domination to mean the absolute opposite of repressive self-control.
So it's not about denying yourself.
No, it defines it as the sovereign authority of the self over its own becoming.
Oh, wow.
It means that your transformation must come from your own internal blueprint, not from an external authority.
Okay, but how does someone actually practice self-domination on a Tuesday?
On a Tuesday.
Yeah, like, are we talking about biohacking, psychological therapy, or just a change in mindset? Because if I'm listening to this on my commute, I want to know what the actual mechanism of this sovereign authority looks like in daily life.
It happens in both the micro decisions and the macro transformations. On a Tuesday, it might mean the conscious refusal to soften your voice in a meeting just because society expects receptive energy from your gender presentation.
That makes perfect sense. And on a macro level,
On a macro level, it dictates how you interact with the medical system.
like with transitioning.
Exactly. If you're pursuing hormonal therapy or surgical changes, self-domination means you aren't asking a doctor to fix you or place you into a socially acceptable binary box.
You're utilizing medical technology as a tool to execute your own internal architectural plans.
Yes. Transcending the categories handed to you at birth is the ultimate act of self-sovereignty.
And what really blew my mind is how the text grounds this incredibly modern idea in deep historical and esoteric
Oh,
traditions.
the historical mapping is incredible.
Because it points out that the longing to balance these internal forces isn't some new internet age phenomenon.
Not at all. The philosophy borrows heavily from ancient spiritual traditions to prove that this is a core human impulse.
Right. It points to Hindu cosmology and the deity Ardhanarishvara.
Who is depicted as half Shiva and half Parvati, perfectly integrated into a single unified body.
And it points to Taoism, too.
Yes, where the dynamic interplay of yin and yang are not enemies fighting for control, but complementary movements within one continuous field.
It even pulls from Jungian psychology with the concepts of the anima and animus.
Right, the unconscious feminine and masculine aspects that every single person carries.
But what this text does, which is so different from a standard theology or psychology textbook, is that it takes these ancient spiritual concepts and maps them directly onto physical, lived bodies in the modern world.
It makes it tangible.
Very tangible. It says that the longing to physically express both generative and receptive energy isn't some undirected dysphoria. It calls it a sacred impulse of the soul reaching for its own completion.
Which fundamentally changes how we define the word destiny.
Exactly. Destiny isn't some mystical fate imposed by the universe.
In this framework, destiny is simply the deepest pattern of your nature finding expression over time.
It's who you already are, slowly forcing the external world to catch up.
And the physical world is catching up, biologically speaking. We're looking at a post-binary horizon.
Yeah, we are already seeing advancements in hormonal medicine and bioengineering that allow people to fundamentally reshape their bodies.
The text makes the philosophical claim that we're moving toward a time when the inner truth of a person's integrated polarity can be consciously and perfectly shaped by their own will.
The body just becomes the clay.
Which raises an important question about how these completely self-actualized people operate in society.
Right, because if someone becomes this completely self-contained, integrated circuit, if they achieve this absolute wholeness, why would they ever date anyone?
That's the big question.
What's the point of a relationship if you don't need someone to provide your missing half?
That is what the text calls the paradox of completeness. You would think that if someone doesn't need you to complete them, there's no space for you in their life.
But the author argues otherwise.
Strongly. The author argues that people are actually deeply drawn to integrated beings, specifically because of three things: presence, stability, and completeness.
Because when you are near someone who has integrated their inner conflicts rather than suppressing them, they possess a massive gravitational pull.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, I love the analogy you're about to use.
If you think about relationships like celestial bodies, a lot of traditional binary relationships operate like two meteors crashing into each other trying to fuse.
Or worse, someone clinging to a life raft because they are drowning in the ocean.
The text defines that as submission performed out of fear. It's a wound looking for a bandage.
You submit because you're afraid of being alone, or because you need the other person to define your boundaries for you.
And the text draws a razor-sharp line between that kind of fear-based submission and true devotion.
Which is where the celestial analogy really lands.
Right. Devotion to an integrated being is entirely different. It's like a planet choosing to orbit an incredibly stable star.
The star doesn't need the planet to exist. It is generating its own immense heat and light.
And the planet isn't diminished or erased by orbiting the star.
The star's massive, reliable gravitational field just brings a beautiful, predictable order to the planet's own system.
That captures the mechanism perfectly. Devotion, in this philosophy, is a spiritual technology.
Chosen from wholeness, not a deficit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is the capacity to give your attention and presence fully, channeling a focused energy from a place of abundance.
When you are submitting out of fear, you're draining energy. When you are operating out of devotion, you're generating it.
Being near someone who does not need you to complete them doesn't make you feel redundant. It makes you feel safe to arrive.
Safe to arrive. That implies that you can finally put down the armor.
You can stop performing whatever societal category you've been exhausting yourself trying to maintain.
If you are listening to this right now and thinking about your own past or current relationships, ask yourself, are you staying out of devotion to a whole person, or are you submitting because you are operating from a deficit?
It's a tough question to ask.
It is, but the primary law of this philosophy is that integration is beautiful, devotion is sacred, and no one is half of anything.
Two entirely whole beings choosing contact freely is the ultimate relational truth.
So we have mapped out this profound internal landscape, and we have established these incredibly intentional relational dynamics.
But a philosophy is only as good as its practical application.
Exactly. So how do we measure this? If you are going to work tomorrow or sitting at your kitchen table trying to figure out your life, how do you know if your inner architecture is actually aligning?
The text refuses to let these high-minded concepts float in the clouds.
It brings everything crashing back down into the literal physical body.
It argues that the body is not separate from philosophy. The body is the philosophical territory.
The author states that your physical presentation, whether that is transitioning, retaining your original anatomy, altering how you dress, or simply refusing to suppress your natural assertiveness in a corporate meeting, is authenticity made visible.
You aren't just making a lifestyle choice. You're becoming a living embodiment of a philosophical position.
You are providing physical proof to the world that a body can contain supposed contradictions and be entirely whole anyway.
But what is the metric?
Right. In engineering, you have structural integrity tests. In medicine, you have blood pressure and heart rate. What is the data we use to measure if this inner architecture is holding up?
The metric is personal happiness.
And the text does something highly unusual here.
Very unusual. The medical and psychological fields often treat happiness as a nice-to-have byproduct, a luxury that comes after survival and societal compliance.
But this text treats happiness as hard data.
It flips the script on suffering, too.
It does. If you're experiencing suffering because you're forcing yourself to perform a gender category or a social role that does not fit you, that suffering isn't just a bad mood or a chemical imbalance to be medicated away.
It is philosophical information.
It's your system's alarm bell telling you that your outer form and your internal blueprint are clashing.
On the flip side, feeling genuinely at home in your body, not because your life is perfectly easy, but because you are undeniably yourself, is the clinical proof that integration is happening.
I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. Apply this data to your own routines.
It's a great exercise.
Where in your life do you feel like you are performing a category that just doesn't quite fit? Where do you feel like you are squeezing your vast, complex circuit into a tiny little battery slot just to make other people comfortable?
And conversely, where do you feel completely effortlessly at home?
What this text does, above all else, is invite you to be the sole authority on your own form. Your doctor does not hold the blueprint. Your family does not hold the blueprint. Cultural expectations certainly don't hold it. You do.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text is reminding us that self-knowledge is the beginning of all wisdom.
This isn't just a utopian thought experiment for 500 years from now.
No, this philosophy operates in the here and now. It's urging us to look at the society we are currently building and ask, what if we organized our communities around internal depth, presence, and integration, rather than binary performance and rigid dominance?
It's a staggering reimagining of how we live. To sum up this incredible deep dive, the core takeaways from the inner architecture of wholeness challenge almost everything we are taught about identity.
They really do.
First, wholeness precedes completion. You are not a fraction waiting for a partner to make you whole.
Second, duality is a spectrum, and generative and receptive energies belong to everyone, regardless of anatomy.
Third, the body is a living philosophical canvas where we make our inner truth visible through the mechanism of self-domination.
Fourth, devotion chosen from abundance is a sacred power, entirely different from submission born of fear.
And finally, your own personal happiness, your visceral sense of being at home in yourself, is the ultimate metric of philosophical truth.
It is a framework that requires a lot of processing. But there's one final provocative thought I want to leave you with, building on the text's ideas about bioengineering and the malleable body.
Lay it on us.
If emerging technologies eventually reach a point where human beings can perfectly, effortlessly, and completely manifest any inner architecture on the outside, will the very concept of societal gender categories simply dissolve? Once the human body becomes a completely fluid expression of the self-sovereign will, might we finally stop categorizing people altogether and just start reading each other as entirely unique, individual works of living philosophy?
Imagine a world where the labels completely fall away and only the architecture remains. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a great conversation.
Wherever you are and whatever unique architecture you carry within you, keep questioning the categories the world tries to hand you. We'll catch you next time.